I think the foundation to getting these conversations going and these visits coordinated are the relationships that we have with members of the research community. And that's the basis of success in research, just fundamentally. People create collaborations, they create relationships with others, they create partnerships, and we do that too as staff at the NSF.
Welcome to Empathy Effect, the Fors Marsh Media podcast that explores the human side of government. I'm your host, Melissa Harris. Academic institutions are some of the most innovative powerhouses in this country. They conduct research and investigations that push boundaries and make great discoveries. A lot of this research is supported by federal grant programs. While there are many agencies that provide research grants, the National Science Foundation's grants make up about 27% of federal funding for basic research conducted at U.S. colleges and universities. Providing about 12,000 new awards per year, the National Science Foundation, or NSF, holds the ability to unlock new opportunities for rising researchers. Historically, NSF hasn't quite been the most equitable in its grants awards, however. Late last year, a new eLife study found that white researchers have been consistently funded by NSF at higher rates than most non-white researchers since at least 1999. So, why do these disparities exist? What is NSF doing to make its grant system more equitable? And how can we elevate research conducted by underrepresented individuals and institutions? Dr. Alicia Knoedler, NSF's head of the Office of Integrative Activities, will help us answer some of these questions. We'll learn about her background in research development, how she's conducting on-the-ground outreach to understand where underserved institutions are struggling, and discuss the new programming at NSF to help colleges and universities develop a more diverse research enterprise for future success. Alicia, it's wonderful to have you on Empathy Effect. I'm really thrilled to have our chat today, and thank you for joining us all the way from Montana. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, and good morning, and I'm thrilled to be here to have this conversation.
Yeah, so just to kick things off, you have a very impressive background, an extensive career working at universities and professional associations in research leadership, all before you got to NSF, which is where you are now. Before we dive into the Office of Integrative Activities, can you share a bit about your journey in leading research efforts across your career? How did you get into this space, and how have you seen the field evolve over time?
Well, thank you for that question. I have been part of the National Science Foundation for just over a year, but I have worked with colleagues from NSF for well over 2 decades, and that's been part of the career path that I've been on. My career, as you said, has mostly been in academia, and I received my PhD from Purdue University in the 90s in cognitive psychology. And from that, as many PhDs have a choice, like, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to go into a faculty path? Should I do a postdoc and get more training? Should I take a job in industry? What should I do with this wonderful intellectual expertise that I've acquired? And I've managed to cultivate a career path that has primarily benefited from serendipity. And part of that has been that I had an interest in teaching cognitive psychology and other areas of psychology, and did some adjunct teaching early in my career in community colleges. And I was in Indiana at the time, so I had a number of campuses of IU and Purdue, Ivy Tech, and so on. So I spent a lot of time helping to mold young minds in STEM disciplines. But at the same time, I was always very interested in helping people follow their own paths of interest. And over a couple of changes and new job opportunities, I landed at the University of Notre Dame. And there I began a position to help faculty pursue resources for their research. Mm-hmm. So over 20 years, I've been continuing to do sort of that in a fundamental way, but I've learned to develop skills in boundary spanning as well as helping others to cultivate their interests and pursue resources around those interests. So those skill sets that I've built out around that have become part of what now I think more nationally is known as research development. So that's kind of the field that I have been in for a number of years now. And research development are individuals who are mostly in universities, but medical schools, research institutes, some private and public organizations. But they work to help build capacity and competitiveness for research. Institutions, in particular universities, colleges and universities, have invested in more staff positions around research development in the last 15 to 20 years. Mm-hmm. And there's been professional society development. There's a group called the National Organization of Research Development Professionals, or NORDEP, that's built resources for training and mentoring and networking of individuals in research development. And so I've been part of all of that throughout my career. Mm-hmm. And in addition to research development, more recently in my career prior to coming to NSF, I engaged nationally to help diversify and develop research leaders, both in their competencies for leadership in a research context, but also positions that research leaders hold, especially in universities and colleges, like vice presidents and vice chancellors for research.
Yeah, and while you did wear many hats over the years, there's definitely this through line I can tell where you have this spirit of wanting to uplift folks.
Absolutely.
And now, you mentioned how you helped many different people, institutions navigate knowing how to access federal research grants from the outside. But now, as you mentioned, you're within NSF. So what drew you to work at Office of Integrative Activities at NSF, especially after you spent so much of your career outside of government? And for those who may not know, can you share a little bit about the mission and goals of your office?
The Office of Integrative Activities at the National Science Foundation is an office that helps join together a lot of different parts of the National Science Foundation. And what I mean by parts is disciplines, different activities at NSF, the work that we do within the agency, as well as connecting with the research community outside of NSF. So we are kind of an interdisciplinary group. We're also an information hub. We are people who have a lot of relationships across the agencies. So by finding somebody in OIA to get an answer to a question, our relationships and our networks are pretty vast. And so we should be able to find an answer or find someone who can help with the answer pretty readily. I like to refer to the folks that are in OIA as eclectic generalists because we have vast interests and very diverse areas of expertise. So we know how to fuse those and put those together. And we're often spanning boundaries and merging opportunities. We're also able to juggle a lot of activities. So all of those requirements for OIA fit very well with my own skill set and my own interests. I like to have a lot of things going on at the same time. And being able to come in and lead OIA in a way that helps us stay at the leading edge, look for new opportunities, inspire others, just kind of fits very well within what I continue to like to do.
Certainly. And I think that what you were just touching upon there really gets to, I think, your passion around diversifying the research field, which is something that we definitely want to touch upon today. And I'm going to reference a study that I found that came out late in November 2022 in the journal eLife. It found that there was a growing gap in racial disparities across NSF grants between 1999 and 2019. It's now 2023. And, while you have all these efforts to try to expand accessibility and diversity in the grants provided, the study did find that white scientists received grants at a rate of 8.5% greater than scientists overall, and Black researchers were funded 8.1% less often than those overall. So since you've been in both academia and NSF itself now, how do you see these disparities showing themselves inside institutions of higher learning. And can you share some of the strategic work that you and your team are doing to ensure more equitable distribution of grant funding for all institutions of higher education?
So thank you for that question. And from the NSF perspective, being able to acknowledge and understand disparities in the research community is incredibly important. And I think what's driving quite a lot of our activity, both within my office, but the whole of the agency, is being able to create opportunities for everyone everywhere. And how we go about doing that, helping people see that those opportunities are available to them, helping them recognize that these sort of to see themselves in those opportunities are where we're putting a lot of our focus. So in the article that you referenced, understanding where those disparities come from and the multiple variables that factor into that is part of what we're spending a lot of time on inside the agency. We have regular evaluations that we do of our own data, but we also have an entire learning agenda for NSF that's publicly available. People can kind of look that up and see where we're putting our focus on systematically addressing and trying to discover, again, the foundation and root of areas of difference across our funding opportunities. And then when people apply for, what's the proposal rate? Where are they coming from? What types of institutions typically apply for our programs, so on and so forth. All of those kinds of data are things that are part of ongoing evaluations for the agency. We also ask for regular feedback from investigators and reviewers for NSF to talk to us about their perspectives and experiences. Mm-hmm. But we're constantly doing outreach to the research community. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for both the research community to engage with NSF, but also for staff from the NSF to learn about what's going on in the research community, in colleges and universities, and research institutes, in industry, and so on. And the more that we have these conversations and we are very accessible about them, the more I think that we can adapt our programs and help other people learn how to access our programs. And I think that, one of the themes that is important to the work that I do and so many others at the foundation is that these principles of access and inclusion are just fundamental to what we do. So let me kind of parse that out a little bit. So making sure that people are aware of the funding opportunities that NSF provides. So part of NSF's mission is basic research and building out the STEM workforce for the future. And in those areas that we're trying to focus on, being able to help people see the funding opportunities that are available. Those are the resources that we can provide for people to build out their research programs, research and training, and gaining infrastructure for their research. If people don't see themselves in those funding opportunities, then we need to change how we communicate those, or we need to help increase awareness.
Right.
So what are the things that we're doing around that in addition to outreach? We have listening sessions with the different communities. Right now, I'm in the state of Montana, and I'm meeting with a number of faculty and other administrators at various universities in the state, because we know that in Montana, which is an EPSCoR state, and NSF has a program called the Established Programs to Stimulate Competitive Research, or EPSCoR. And this is a program that highlights the need for funding around geographic diversity. And so anytime we're seeing, again, those barriers and potential disparities in receiving funding, we're trying to address them through our programs and our understanding.
Yeah, and it's really easy to think like, oh, everyone's in DC and they're so bureaucratic and they're just, trapped in their big institutional buildings. But, you mentioned yourself are doing outreach right now. You're in Montana engaging with these institutions in largely rural areas. So I just wanted to see if you can give us a glimpse into what these trips look like for you. How do you connect with the communities and understand their needs? And how do you take what you learn to inform your work at NSF and ultimately support or better support these underserved researchers and institutions?
So I think the foundation to getting these conversations going and these visits coordinated are the relationships that we have with members of the research community. And that's the basis of success in research, just fundamentally. People create collaborations, they create relationships with others, they create partnerships. And we do that too as staff at the NSF. So again, me coming into the NSF after 20 plus years in academia, I have a lot of relationships, fabulous colleagues that I have across the country. Being able to reach out and have conversations with them, to be transparent, to have to really hear about where they are struggling with challenges or they have great successes. I want to hear about both. So finding ways in which to come up with a reason to make the effort to do an in-person visit. And when we come to a location, so for example, when I'm taking an outreach visit like this, we really rely on those relationships and those colleagues that we've connected with to kind of craft a great visit. And a visit might entail multiple universities in a state, which is what we're doing here in Montana. I'll mention the EPSCoR program again because Montana is an EPSCoR state, so they are eligible for funding through the EPSCoR program. And so we are interested in connecting with them about their successes and the impact of the research that they've done through EPSCoR funding. But we're also interested in ways in which they're kind of planning the next 5 to 10 years and having those conversations and understanding how they're doing their collaborations, how they're strategically choosing directions of research. These are all parts of the conversations that we're having. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was that we often hear where people feel like they've pursued an opportunity at NSF. I submitted a proposal for funding, but it didn't get funded. And they're trying to strategize around how to be successful. And this is something where I kind of sometimes take off my NSF hat and put on my research development hat again and say, well, there are some ways in which to write your proposals or utilize the framework of NSF's proposal submissions to highlight different things that maybe people don't know about your particular institution or your particular research area. And we had a conversation like that yesterday where I was sharing some research development ideas. And the investigators that I were talking to, they said, oh, we didn't know that we could do that with this part of the proposal. Thank you for that advice. We will go on and be able to do that. So I think that we oftentimes when we have very formal presentations and seminars and other kinds of very formal things, we don't often get into the details of where we might have a critical conversation that makes a significant difference. And then those folks, if they're able to implement that suggestion and it works for them, they can pass it on to others. And the knowledge sharing that happens means that my bandwidth, which might be very limited, gets extended because people have experienced something from what I've been able to share with them.
Yeah, and that just sort of makes me wonder if you can share an instance or two of how increased support or resources or grants, even those conversations that you have one-on-one with different people, especially with underrepresented academic institutions or researchers, how have they made a difference not only for the investigations you funded, but making the realm of research generally more robust and diverse as a whole?
So I'm going to highlight one particular program that we're just getting off the ground at NSF, and it's a wholly new area for NSF to be pursuing as a funding opportunity. That there's an aspect of what we call the research enterprise, the people and practices that happen to make research possible. And the research enterprise includes a number of people like research development professionals that I mentioned earlier, who work with investigators to help them pursue funding for research, but also build resources at their own institutions, help train the students who are participating in research, help make sure that the research is secure and that we're complying with regulations and that we're building partnerships as needed. So there's a whole backbone to research success. And the professionals that make that happen are individuals in a lot of different areas, such as research development, research administration, and so on. With the pandemic, what we recognized was that individuals in the research enterprise have been very successful in transitioning into serving their faculty in virtual environments, so in hybrid connections or doing some work remotely. But it's also been the case that during the pandemic, a lot more people applied for funding. They were able to submit more proposals. We saw some people who weren't able to submit more proposals. So we really saw some very interesting patterns. But I think what we recognized was the backbone of the research enterprise, those staff that were essential for helping the researchers be successful, that their success was really important for keeping the research enterprise or all of the funded research going as well.
Yeah.
So being able to invest in that backbone to make sure that there are enough staff and that there are staff coming up through, from graduating from high school and college and graduate school, that they're able to enter into positions that support the research enterprise. So this new program that we're starting at NSF, and this is our first year in launching this, it's called, we have a creative acronym for this, it's called GRANTED. And GRANTED stands for Growing Research Access for Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. And the premise is that not everyone has the same access to that research backbone. Some institutions have a lot of staff who provide support through the research enterprise, and then there are other institutions that don't have anybody to help, or they might have one person who covers a lot of different areas. And the Granted program is really recognizing that there's some fragility to this backbone, that sometimes we don't maybe have a career pathway set up for people to follow. I earlier talked about how my career pathway was very much just stitching together different opportunities. Mm-hmm. We need to be more intentional with how we show people that this is a viable career path. It's an exciting career path. It's not always in STEM, but that's a big piece of where science, technology, engineering, and math, those disciplines utilize the research enterprise all the time. So what is it that we are intentionally doing to help build out the research enterprise staff? How are we helping people find positions in these areas? How are we helping people see that these are exciting positions to hold? How can we see them crafting a advancement in their careers?
Yeah.
Granted program is going to provide funding to help research communities figure this out, whether they're coming from HBCUs or minority serving institutions or partnering with Research One institutions, community colleges, industry, private foundations. Doesn't really matter. It's the full research community that we're seeking input from. But we just released a Dear Colleague letter, which is a kind of way of directing people's attention to funding opportunities. And we're looking to encourage people to hold convenings, conferences, workshops, and so on, to bring communities together to talk about the research enterprise and how they want to intentionally support the growth and expansion of the research enterprise.
That's so fascinating, especially talking about the backbone. You need the infrastructure in place to really make everything flourish. And I know that, having those research development experts are very helpful. And you've touched on some other areas that really help people give a leg up. But I'm curious just to go back to the basics for a moment. What are some of the key factors that lead certain institutions to maybe not have the same opportunities to access grants? Maybe we haven't touched on anything, but I just wanted to, pick your brain a little on that.
Sure. So I'm going to give a very personal example to answer that question. Mm-hmm. When I spent some time at Penn State University, my first position was in the Department of Psychology, and I was working with faculty there to specifically help them pursue more resources for their funding. So to sit down one-on-one with a faculty member and hear about what they want to do with their research programs, when you have an ally who can sit there and talk to you about, this is what I want to do with my research. This is how I want to engage students. This is how I want to have an impact on my field. This is the kind of growth trajectory I want to go. I want to start with a few students, and then I want to include graduate students and postdocs, and I eventually want to develop a new theory in my discipline. those kinds of conversations, you could certainly have it with a colleague or a mentor in your discipline, but they may or may not be able to also help you chart a course for resources to help you do all of those things throughout your career.
Right.
So when I was at Penn State, I spent one-on-one time with a lot of faculty, just helping them craft what I came to call their research program. What is your career-long look at your research trajectory? And how do I help you figure out how to gain access to the resources you need to be successful? I want that kind of ally for every researcher across the nation. So my intention in working at NSF and again, calling on my colleagues and others across the nation to think about what role they play in being able to support that kind of vision. That's my hope, is that we can develop that in the research enterprise. We can develop that kind of mentoring and sharing across the nation. We can be collegial in how we build out support. And then we can recognize that not everyone's at the same starting line. Mm-hmm. And how is it that we help give access to people who haven't had those allies? How do we find them? How do we cultivate them? How do we make sure that they're accessible?
Yeah. Clearly you have a lot of the energy and spirit to say, like, I want to go out and, help everyone make their research successful. You want to give everyone, that's someone who could help pave their trajectory across their research careers. And, doing this kind of work requires a lot of intentional investment in your own self-identity and your own ability to believe in people to grow. So what are you building within OIA from a cultural and policy perspective to really make this happen? Or if there are other best practices from other agencies you've heard of who also provide grants, how are you adopting those? I know that other agencies like FEMA have been doing things like leveraging data to usher in more equitable grant investments. It sounds like, you also evaluate your own data to see your own progress. So, what innovative approaches and changes in culture do you think are most helpful for improving grant systems?
So thank you for that question. And I recognize that measurement, using data to inform decision-making and guide people's sort of awareness and perspective around what's happening is absolutely critical. But let's just say that we have all the data in front of us. What are those basic principles or fundamental principles that underlie what we're doing? And for me, I think it's very much about accessibility and inclusivity. And if I can parse those two things here really quickly, I think accessibility is having broad awareness that there's quite a bit of diversity out there and people have different perspectives on what's accessible. Sometimes people see that there's an opportunity there, but they might interpret it as not being for them, or it might not be something that they can readily get access to. What is it that we're doing within NSF and with our programs and our outreach to reinforce that message of accessibility? And I think that's a fundamental principle that we work on in OIA. And I think we have a number of colleagues outside of OIA who also operate from that fundamental principle. But also thinking about inclusivity. So what is it that we are doing to help people feel that they belong in the research community, that they, again, can see themselves in the opportunities that we provide? I talked earlier about granted convenings, and we're looking to receive proposals from the research community and so that they can come up with ideas about how they would hold workshops and conferences to include people around conversations to build out the research enterprise. We want to see very inclusive convenings. We want to see people broaden their perspective on who could be included, not should be, but could be included, and the richness that people's different perspectives bring to those kinds of conversations. So I think that what I'm trying to help people see inside of NSF through my own demonstrated practices, my own behaviors, is how both accessibility and inclusivity can be done repeatedly in everything that we do. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of pathways in, and how do we make sure that people feel that they are welcome and that they belong, right, and that their voice is heard in all of what we do.
Definitely. We've touched on a lot today, from your own background to seeing your passion in helping uplift researchers and make everything more equitable in the pipeline, building that backbone to make sure that each researcher has the opportunity to really thrive in their careers. So, as we wrap up today, can you sort of just give us one or two key takeaways that you hope our listeners walk away with from this conversation?
So I'm going to kind of go backwards to what I initially started to talk about in my own career path, where I had a number of opportunities. And I think that those opportunities came in ways that were accidental and serendipitous, as I described before. But sometimes I was taking advantage of opportunities that maybe not everybody has exposure to. And I want to recognize that the opportunities that I have had, I'm trying to also make available for others. And what I want to encourage other people to see is that to say yes to opportunities that are put in front of them. And I know that's not always possible. Sometimes the timing's not right. Sometimes it's not the right opportunity. Sometimes it doesn't seem like the right opportunity. Mm-hmm. But when I mentor others and I encourage others to seek opportunities, I like to think about, if you look 5 to 10 years down the road, let's say that you said yes to that opportunity, what do you think you'd be doing? And what do you think, what else happened in the course of accepting that opportunity and pursuing it that you think were also influential? And if those are things that you think you need to put in place to be successful, then who's going to help you get there? And oftentimes I like to offer up my help and to say, hey, how can I help you be successful? How can I help you get there? But I want to encourage other people to find ways in which to make themselves available. And I think that creates new opportunities, but I also think it helps people see what true accessibility looks like, mm-hmm. what true inclusivity looks like. It helps people really welcome more perspectives. It helps people expand what the diversity of experiences that's out there. And the other thing is that maybe I'm one of those people who ask for forgiveness more than I ask for permission. But I do enjoy innovating.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I've talked about today is asking why or how and engaging a lot of people in those conversations so that we might be able to craft a different pathway. And sometimes the different pathways are going to be those pathways that other people who've experienced barriers can actually find success going down that new pathway that we've created.
Perfect. Alicia, I really appreciate you sharing some of your perspectives on the show today. I'm sure others will walk away feeling really energized, and hopefully we give some listeners some tools to know how to feel more confident approaching the grant system at NSF or other agencies.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm thrilled to have the chance to talk in a very enthusiastic way about what we're doing at NSF, but also to have that opportunity to talk about new areas that we're cultivating and new approaches and philosophies that we have.
As we wrap up, I want to share a couple more resources for those of you looking to engage with NSF. On nsf.gov, you can find the staff contact directory of people who you can reach out to at the foundation. NSF is also starting something called the Program Suitability and Proposal Concept Tool, or Prospect. That's PROSPCT. With this tool, even if you don't know anyone at NSF, you can submit your research idea and someone from NSF will help you find the best person to talk to figure out your next steps. You can find Prospect at suitability.nsf.gov. Thank you, Alicia, for sharing your story and work with us. And thanks to everyone who tuned in for this episode. I hope you'll join us next time.
Empathy Effect is a product of Fors Marsh. You can reach us at Fors Marsh Media at forsmarsh.com with any feedback, questions, or inquiries.